Good afternoon. Wow, that's some energy. Good afternoon. Let's try that again. Yay. Awesome. All right. I thought the coffee wasn't working or something, but it seems to. Hey, so look, at HFS, for the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot of research around AI adoption. And what we've seen is that almost every Global 2000 enterprise is trying to do something with AI, but very few have actually scaled it up, right? And I think AI is inevitable, but it's just so hard. And it's a pleasure to actually talk to somebody like you, Steve, who's actually scaled this thing up, right? And
there's actually a team.
Yeah. So let's start the conversation, Steve, and tell me a little bit about what you do at KPMG, and more interestingly, how did a taxman become interested in AI?
I'm going to minimize the tax. So, as Todd mentioned, I lead innovation for tax here in the U.S. And my background is tax. I spent 10 years focused on the taxation of mergers and acquisitions, and then another 11 years running the business in our Washington, D.C. area. So sort of have really both sides, the very tax-centric side and the business side. And so marrying those is a natural place. And when we do innovation, we have a lot of different frameworks we focus on. And one is that, hey, if we have a new capability, how will this impact our current business from an incremental innovation standpoint, but also a lot further than that. What new value propositions are possible? What new business models are possible, et cetera? So AI seemed like an interesting thing to explore along those lines, and that's what we did. And we started about 3 or 4 years ago doing that.
Okay, yeah. So before we get to understand a little bit more about what are you doing in the tax services, I think AI is a confusing term, right? Everybody,
right.
If nothing, almost everyone sort of talks about AI as this monolith technology, whereas in reality it's sort of a cluster of many technologies sort of bundled together, which we colloquially call as AI. So do you agree with that? And how do you sort of look at
Right. So I guess the way we've sort of thought about it is really, as you said, taking a variety of technologies and mashing them together and integrating them so that we're able to examine data, generate a hypothesis, and make a conclusion that's probabilistic rather than binary, and do that in a way that emulates and augments what our tax professionals do. So it's really, a lot of parts. It's not just one technology, and in fact, there's a lot of lessons learned around that.
So it's a combination of multiple technologies.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about the specific sort of AI-powered tax services. Are you sort of automatically filling up 1040s, or what are you doing now?
Right. And so I'm sure most people think when they think of tax, they think of their individual tax return, and we do actually very little of that at all.
Oh, man.
Just to break down the business a little bit, probably about 45% has to do with getting the business tax returns done for a variety of different kinds of businesses, very large corporations to smaller ones, and private equity and startups, et cetera. Probably 55% of our business has nothing to do with tax returns. It's really advice around business transactions. And so therefore very much it's marrying understanding the business side to the tax law, which is constantly changing, not only because Congress changes the laws, as we know, big tax law about 1.5 years ago, but also court cases and administrative rulings, et cetera. So it's always in flux. There's no natural law around tax, so you have to architect in a way that anticipates that kind of change. Right?
Yeah. So give us a few client examples, if you may, on what is the client sort of using KPMG for, and where does AI sort of fit into that picture?
Right. So there's a lot of different things we do. Maybe I'll break it down into two situations. One is where we're actually analyzing transactions, and so what that could mean is transactions that make up a general ledger account. That could mean just transactions that, every day, whether revenue or expense or expenditures or whatever else. And we're analyzing that based on the features in that transaction and making some sort of determination. Maybe we have a small and medium business sector, and maybe that's as simple as looking at those transactions and classifying them into the general ledger accounts. Maybe it's looking at transactions of a general ledger account and determining should items be capitalized or expensed, or how much is deductible for tax purposes, or how much sales tax applies, or VAT. So there's lots of levels of analyzing at the transaction level, the taxability of it, or the business or cash flow or otherwise. So that's one big bucket of possibilities. The other one we focus on is really analyzing documents. And this gets back to our business where we're doing, the majority of it is giving advice. And so analyzing documents, we have tax lawyers and accountants who are reviewing documents and determining based on that, important decisions about impact on cash flows, et cetera. And so I have a good example, and actually just before lunch, I got the news that we actually won a proposal using AI, and the primarily cited reason was our AI solution. And just to give a little background, what happens is the Congress had determined that they want to encourage research and development. And the way they do that is they provide a subsidy, and that subsidy is a credit against income taxes, and we call it the R&D credit. And in that R&D credit, if the IRS comes in and audits a company, it's a very contentious area. The IRS often argues you don't qualify for that subsidy because so much money is at stake. Something like $11 billion a year is at stake that is given for these subsidies. So KPMG helps companies try to acquire those subsidies. But the challenge with that, because of the IRS contention, is number one, how good is the documentation to so you qualify for the subsidy? And the way we typically do that is review thousands of documents. And in this case, this company has thousands of documents which have to be reviewed, and you can't possibly review them all, so you just want to take a sample. And the only way to sample them really effectively and cost effectively was to look at the name of the title of the document, what actually isn't very good, right? The other thing we would do is interview people, interview scientists, interview engineers, and that causes a lot of business disruption. The CFO and the finance folks, they don't like to hear that their research and development people are aggravated because they're being interviewed to get the subsidy. So how did we use AI in this case? Well, we used our tax lawyers and accountants to actually train the algorithms, train the machine, look for the subtleties in documents. And what we do then is put those thousands of documents into our solution, and it reads through the solutions, at breakneck speed, or reads through the documents rather, and categorize those and prioritize those documents so that our professionals are only looking at the top documents based on how it's been trained that meet those qualifications. And we can do that at scale and for a number of different industries. This happens to be a food manufacturer, but in aerospace and defense, in pharmaceutical, financial services. So all of them, you need specialized knowledge in training the machine for that, and we use our lawyers and accountants to directly do that. So the reason that's exciting is once you're able to do that, you have better documentation to retain the subsidy, but also you don't spend nearly as much time interviewing, if you interview at all, the engineers and scientists and so forth, so it lowers the business disruption. So what I like to say here is we're not just paving the cow path using AI, right? We're not just taking a processing and making it more efficient. What we're really doing is turning the process on its head and creating a different customer solution fit, and also changing our business model and our value proposition at the same time.
So if I understood you correctly, the value proposition for the client is not just better productivity or cheaper or faster, but it's really, you don't have to worry about the business disruption because of these acquisitions or divestitures or what have you, because the AI behind the scenes can sort of do all that.
That's right. But it also, we've learned, because we have IRS audits all the time, when we're using this, because our documentation is better, the overall subsidy we retain is also higher. So we get less business disruption, and more subsidy.
More
Those
outcomes.
two things coming together.
Got it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so that's a really good story, but and that was a good example of what's the client impact.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure there'll be an impact on KPMG
On the people, right,
internally, right? What's been the sort of experience there?
So it's interesting because when we first started talking about it, I remember the very first large meeting, and you know, you need quite a varied team here, right? We need lawyers and accountants, we need data scientists and engineers, we need data experts, we need, you know, all change management, UI, UX, all of those things matter. And I remember at that very first kickoff meeting, we were having sort of the team dinner, and some of the younger folks that were the lawyers were saying, I was telling my parents I was doing this, and they said, why are you, you're going to put yourself out of the job, right?
Yes.
And so that was, of course, the natural fear. And what we've learned, because we've been doing this a while, and I mentioned we're doing it on the transaction level as well, is very much there's a human in the loop element to this. So what in actuality has happened is the AI is doing taking a lot of the mundane work and the work that what we call the soul crushing work, that's mundane, right? And we serve up then the ability for those folks to do what they really enjoy about analysis and planning and solving puzzles along with the machine. So there's this really symbiotic relationship where what we find is the professionals are learning more about their job and tax as they use the machine. And we use supervised learning, so they're training the machine at the same time. And so really the machine's getting smarter and our people are getting smarter at the same time. But we definitely need that judgment in there, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, yeah. So talk a little bit about the journey. You mentioned you started, 3-4 years back, so it has been a journey. And I'm assuming not everything would have been hunky-dory, right?
We've had some.
So tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced and what were some of the biggest learnings on this journey.
So I would say when we first started out and we thinking about it and we met with various folks, that we innately thought there's got to be something here we can do, but it was hard to come up with a use case. And we came up with one little one here and one little one there, and we did a proof of concept, and then as we were learning more and more, all of a sudden the gates opened up and we could see a lot more possibilities. But one of my first learnings is a POC is not a production system. And so actually the folks we were working with very much did this rules-based POC. And I would say if I were we were sort of co-sourcing this. If I'm a consumer of these kind of services, I would be very careful of that. I had to actually unwind, an architecture sign-off because I figured out, oh my God, these guys are writing rules rather than doing true AI. So that was one lesson. The second lesson is, we focus so much, one solution we were looking at, one use case, we focus so much on solving the technical problem using AI. How is it that we can classify, this was for trade and customs, classify a product based on descriptions for trade and customs purposes. And that was really cool. We figured out how to do that and use an ontology for that. But then when we went to implement it, what we found was very hard is, like in the retail space, for example, there are different product descriptions each company has. So actually sourcing the data in a way that you could apply your AI was especially challenging. So, we've overcome that now, but that was a big lesson. You don't just think about solving the hardest problem. There's an end-to-end process that you have to think about the whole way. And so as we're stepping back and thinking about that solution, that's the second thing. And the third thing I learned is no matter how smart that machine is, and this isn't, I know all technology people know this, I'm a tax guy, maybe I didn't, but the UI UX is the sizzle that sells all of it. It's hard for people to distinguish what's actually going on behind the scenes, but the UI UX is the sizzle that makes them say, hey, I want that one, or I want that one. So I would say those are some of our lessons.
Yeah, no. So I think when we've been doing our research and we've asked a lot of sort of clients on what are the big challenges, I think data definitely comes up on top. I think the other two that we've also heard a lot about is it takes a lot of time to train these algorithms to provide some meaningful results. And then the third one, which I'm assuming will be very relevant here, is explainability of AI, right? Because you can't just, let's say, take the examples of these divestitures that are,
Right.
or the acquisitions that you were talking about. You can't just take something that the algorithm throws out, but you've got to prove why or how did it come up with that decision. So how did you manage those kind of challenges on this?
Right. Well, I think it all comes back to the business process. We're constantly using human in the loop, and that's our philosophy. So the algorithm training, we get a pretty good head start based on the data and the training and the annotation we're doing with our lawyers and accountants. But we're essentially, because we're at production, crowdsourcing the training of those algorithms. And we have a process whereby people are looking at what the machine is coming out with. And the machine not only gives you the probabilistic answer, this goes to your explainability, it also gives the legal reasoning as to why that is appropriate. And when the person's reviewing, they're reviewing both. What's the answer and is the explanation proper? Because we have to hand that deliverable over, for example, to the IRS. And so that is all, there's a supervised learning aspect of that gets curated before it gets put back in the corpus. So that's how we're handling that explainability, as well as putting the algorithm better. And by the way, that's a lesson too, because one of our very first solutions, we did not have that supervised learning and feedback back in. And you don't have to do that with the person right there. There's other ways to do it, and we're experimenting with different ways. But I would say that's how we're handling that. And I'm sorry, what was the second piece? I guess that was explainability and the algorithm. So, yeah.
No, that's great. So where do you go from here? What's where are you looking at any other emerging technologies? We've heard a lot about blockchain, for example, and I can assume smart contracts would be an interesting possibility. Are you?
Yeah, right. So I think we keep on opening that aperture for using AI and a lot more. Now that we've got our legs and we're in production, we have a lot more understanding of what's possible, and so we have a lot more of that. But emerging technologies really is. We have some experiments with blockchain, some hypothesis, and we're really excited about that, because when you start thinking about the possibilities of blockchain and you start putting AI into that, in the smart contracts, et cetera, as we're analyzing those transactions, as I described. So blockchain can give us the transactions to do the analysis on, and so marrying those two are really exciting. And you can see how easy it is going to be later on, because tax means different things to different people, but there are all kinds of different taxes within and without the U.S. And so one transaction may have 6 or 7 or 10 or even 15 possibilities of different kinds of tax analysis. But once you say, hey, you need that you can use the AI for tax, well, that's not the only rule set that can apply, right? It can be for other regulatory or accounting or other business reasons as well. So that's exciting and a good frontier to focus on.
That's very exciting. Look, I'm an analyst. I can keep asking you a lot of questions, but I wanted to make sure that if there are any questions from the audience. If none, I can go on.
I can answer, hey, if you want to know how to lower your taxes on your individual return too.
All right, so maybe one last question from me, Steve, before we wrap up. So, and I usually end our interviews with this: if there's one wish that could come true for you, what would that be? One wish that could come true. All right. I should have thought about this more. I think the ability to really scale things in a much faster way, I guess. I mean, that we're a regulated company that has lots of appropriate professional standards and so forth. So adhering those standards and being able to scale quickly, that's what we're aiming to do, and that's what we try to do. So that's my wish. No. Look, I think there are very few examples of AI at scale, and I think I congratulate you and the team to sort of getting it here, and looking forward to see you sort of cross new barriers, and wish you best of luck. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.